Blue Cross and Blue Shield companies formed out of a need to provide affordable health care to teachers, loggers, and miners. We are now celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Blues, developing the National Labor Office to strengthen its commitment to organized labor. Blue Cross Blue Shield's National Labor Office remains focused on America's workers, advocating for affordable and equitable health care, partnering with strategic alliances to provide industry-leading products and services, and proudly serving more than 18 million unionized workers, retirees, and their families. Working hard for America's working families, for the health of America. Learn more by following them at Blue Labor on LinkedIn and X, formerly known as Twitter. And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That'd be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. Let's go to line number one. And joining us is Tina Way. Tina is an assistant professor of history at Florida International University based in Miami, Florida. She is a historian of science by training, and she studies how science has transformed work and business in modern America. In fact, her book project, When Workers Won't Work, How Scientists, Employers, and Social Reformers Understood and Sought Remedies for Industrial Fatigue and Other Workplace Afflictions. And we're talking about a time period of 1910 to 1940, tracing the history of fatigue in the workplace. I have fatigue. I'm suffering from fatigue just reading all of what you have done here. Tina, thanks for joining us here on America's Workforce. And this is part of our Labor 131 segment on the show as we commemorate the 131st anniversary of Labor Day. And you think back to, my gosh, the 1880s, the 1890s. That was a time where people worked 12, 16, 18-hour days, very little time for family, very little time for sleep. And there's a lot of people, I mean, take a look at what's going on in America today. Amazon, many call that a sweatshop, and we're going to get into that as well. Tina, welcome to America's Workforce. Thanks for joining us today. And I gave a little background on yourself. Talk to me about getting involved in this line of work, a little bit more about you, any union connections in your family. If you don't mind, let's start right there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually got interested in the study of labor through the management side. So after I graduated from college, I ended up working at Google in their HR department, but instead of calling it human relations, they called it people operations. So that's their term for how they reimagined human resources in the digital age. And so in working in that department and seeing all the studies that Google ran on its employees about so-called workplace wellness, that's how I began to be interested in the history of it, to study how did we get here? How did these departments form so that you have these massive teams of scientists studying so-called workplace wellness, and why is it that the way they get around to giving workers wellness is through, free food, the free lunches, the nap pods, the meditations, all of this. So I wanted to study what was the history of that. So then I left that job and I started a PhD in the history of science at Harvard. And while I was there, the graduate students went on strike. And that's how I ended up getting involved in the Graduate Student Union at Harvard, UAW, HGSU 5118 local. And I ended up being on the executive board of the Grad Student Union there. And through that, of course, I learned a lot about, the inner workings of the UAW, about graduate local organizing. And then I also worked as like a program assistant for the Harvard Trade Union program. I don't know if you're familiar with that program. It's been around since the 1940s, and it started at Harvard Business School, but it's basically a program for trade union leaders to come to Harvard to get an education for a short period of time. And so we get trade union leaders from all sorts of industries, the building trades, nursing, teaching, everything. And yeah, they attend courses taught often by Harvard faculty, MIT faculty, people in the area. And through that, I helped run the program operationally, but I was also able to give some guest lectures, around the topics that I researched. So technology, AI, labor, and the impacts of changes in technology on the labor force.
Do you still keep in touch with folks at Harvard? I bring that up because that university is under attack by the current administration.
Yeah, I just graduated in May, so I just caught the tail end of a lot of, the commotion. But from what I'm hearing is just really, people are under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are sweating.
It seems to me, and we're way off subject here, but I mean, the attack on universities, on science in general, I mean, I fear for the future. I mean, I'm sure you've been hearing a whole lot about that. I mean, anything that moves the nation forward, and think about where we are today, it's because of science and research. It's because of Harvard, Columbia, UCLA, Stanford, all these institutions of higher learning. Yeah, they're pricey. I understand that, but there's a reason for it. They do amazing work. Sadly, all of that is under attack right now. And these researchers, they're going to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
They're going to go elsewhere, and other countries are going to benefit on that. Like I said, it's a little bit off subject here, but that's interesting that you bring up. I mean, you're on management and you get to the union. That's fascinating in itself, and that's almost another show in itself. But let's talk. That your book really caught my attention, When Workers Won't Work. And I have said this on the show many, many times, that it seems America is going in a direction where we don't want workers anymore. Artificial intelligence, robotics, you throw all that stuff in there and you see how many jobs have been lost by, two main sources. Trade deals that ships jobs overseas, mainly manufacturing jobs because of lower labor costs. And then you have robotics, the Industrial Revolution, if we want to go that far back, and we've seen a lot of job loss. Are we coming to a point where there's going to be hardly anything left, in your opinion, with everything I just said?
Yeah, and I think the social question is, how do we provide livable lives for everyone if the number of jobs will be cut or the number of workers are needed to sustain these industries are significantly cut? I think, of course, historians never like to make predictions about the future, but I really do feel that what we're seeing right now is what's happening to so-called brain work is happening now that had happened in the past to manual work or physical labor. And so a lot of the developments in AI are going to be replacing anything really that fundamentally deals with language and where the output is primarily work around language. And I think that is deeply destabilizing for the value of a college degree, because it seems to me like the labor market just doesn't need so many college educated workers to sustain itself. But I guess it's really anyone's call. It could be that the AI technologies that are being put on the market now are overblown in what they can accomplish. Maybe there are still gaps that they can't accomplish, and that's where you need human workers to fill in or check their output or organize them or prompt them. But yeah, I think this is a time when a lot of industries that were considered super stable, like software engineering, now they just don't need that many coders anymore. And I grew up in the generation where you were told like 75% of the job creation will be in jobs that use coding as a foundational skill. And now a lot of these students can't find jobs coming out of those programs. And so it's, I think, put a huge crisis in terms of science and technology job markets, in addition to what you just talked about federal funding for science. And so it's a huge question about, if the labor market is not there for science and technology jobs, maybe people won't go into them anymore. Maybe people won't train in them anymore. Maybe people will go into other countries. And even though you can flip the policies on and off with a switch, people might not necessarily move back at the same rate. Or once people go into other industries, I don't know if they feel burned and they don't want to re-enter an industry that I don't know, made them feel like they were betrayed. But it's a lot of people I know right now, science researchers are asking themselves these questions about, is this even sustainable? Because the funding pipeline has just been, in many cases, completely ripped out or condensed dramatically.
Now, where are they going? Are we unique in this, United States, because of what's going on in Washington right now? What about other countries, to your knowledge?
A lot of other people may be able to tell you like a much deeper history of this, but basically the US, in terms of its science funding, the robustness of our science funding, how much money we put into science, is really unique in this sense. And very few other countries put so much money into the funding of science. And a lot of this developed around mid-century during World War II and immediately in the aftermath of that. And so we didn't build up the scientific infrastructure overnight. And so it's not that you'll tear it down overnight, even with some dramatic actions.
Right.
But it's not as if it's been there forever. It's been there pretty much since the 50s and building since then. And so in some ways, it's kind of a more recent development. But comparatively speaking, Europe puts much less money into scientific research. But what I've seen so far is some very fancy researchers are getting poached by universities in Canada and in France and so on. So that's where I've seen people go. I've seen some people go to China, but of course there are other issues with academics moving to China that might make it less desirable for some people than moving to universities in Canada and France. But that's what I've seen. But it's not like every university in France can absorb the massive amount of US science researchers that are getting impacted in the current moment. So I think a lot of people are left in the lurch.
Yeah, the question is, what are they going to do? And they're probably trying to figure that as we speak here. Let's take a look into your book that I mentioned earlier about workplace afflictions, the history of fatigue in the workplace. And you have the years 1910 to 1940. What's your reasoning for that time period?
So right around 1910 and before that, there had been some research by physiologists into the physiology of what they called industrial fatigue. So you have this question of, for example, a worker works in a blast furnace and it's 110 degrees and they go in there for 10 minutes every 3 hours. How many times can they repeat this before they physically collapse? And so some of the researchers had considered the question of fatigue as a question of like a bright line of how much can you push the human worker to work before this worker, this human machine, can no longer perform the task that you assign to it. And so it becomes a research question because businesses want to understand this as a better way of stewarding and using human labor. And during World War I, it was also considered of national security interest, of a wartime interest, because they needed to increase production during wartime of munitions and so on. And so the dissertation looks at what happens when this question of fatigue and all these conditions that emerge in the workplace that prevent workers from working, what happens when different scientists start to wonder, is it also mental? And scientists start to propose the hypothesis that some of these workers who claim that they can't work due to fatigue or other reasons, there's nothing wrong with their physical body, but that there's something wrong with their minds. And so lots of different, the book basically traces the process of how different scientific subdisciplines come to target this question of when you see a worker and they don't work, how do you understand that problem scientifically and how do you remedy that through science? How do you collect data about workers in order to pin down what's wrong with them in the workplace? And these solutions that they find range anywhere from, you take their blood, urine, vitals, and you test their body, to looking at motion, so ergonomics, fatigue that comes from how you're sitting, the angle of your elbows, and so on, repetitive strain injuries, all the way to insanity as a cause for why workers are unable to work.
So it sounds to me managers are trying to squeeze as much as they possibly can out of a worker until that worker explodes or is not worth having as a worker anymore. That's exactly what we're talking about. This is fascinating. Our featured guest today is Tina Wei, who is an assistant professor of history at the Florida International University. And this is another segment in Labor 131 as we march toward the 131st anniversary of Labor Day. Back in a few minutes. Once again, you're listening to America's Workforce. And don't forget, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. We always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. Our featured guest today, Tina Way, who's an assistant professor of history at Florida International University in Miami. She teaches courses in U.S. history, labor history, business history, history of science, technology, medicine. We're talking in the first segment about how managers have, throughout the years, found multiple ways to squeeze what they can out of workers. And you know what? I want to talk about productivity because we have seen, because of technology over the years and what it's done for businesses, you have to do more. You have to do more, and you're being productive. Sadly, the wages don't reflect that. And productivity has just skyrocketed because of what I just said. And that's where labor unions come in and say, well, wait a minute, we're doing the job. You're making a lot of money. You're very profitable, but somehow we're not sharing in all this. And your research has looked at the potential impact of artificial intelligence on this. You mentioned about how higher ed. Let's talk about productivity. I want to bring up Amazon because there's an article here that you're involved with called Amazon Mechanical Turk, the Human Sciences Labor Problem. And I've had Amazon workers on this show many, many times. It's not pretty what they're going through. The vans, they're monitored. And here's a company that's built on productivity. You order a package in the morning, you get it at the end of the day. Well, there's a cost to a human delivering that package. Can you speak to that, of what's going on in America today? Because there is a history involved here.
Yeah, the article that you mentioned is about the online crowdsourcing platform that Amazon has. So they had originally created this platform, which they call Amazon Mechanical Turk, as a way to perform internal functions. But many of these tech companies, including Amazon, then open up this platform for outside use as a way to test whether or not it's a good platform. And so they allow people outside the company to perform those tasks as well. So crowdsourcing is any type of gig work, or similar to any type of gig work where you pick up tasks based on the task rather than picking up a job or a career or any kind of long-term contract, which I'm sure you understand and are familiar with. Digital crowdsourcing platform is when people do the work online. Mm-hmm. And so the types of tasks they're doing are filling out surveys, or you give them small tasks that they can perform on their computer with a digital, like internet connection. The way in which AI comes into this is that there are all sorts of human labors that are involved in training AI, in labeling data sets that will then help train AI, to check the output that comes out of AI, or to basically essentially grade, or they say annotate the output from the AI. So you constantly need this human labor to check how the AI training is going, but that's very labor intensive, takes a lot of time, and the engineers don't do that. So they have these various platforms and other ways of hiring people online, or sometimes in other developing countries, to do this work for them. And the reason for that is that there are certain tasks that are difficult for computers or AI to perform, but that are easy for humans to perform. So some of it is online content moderation on social media. Like when someone reports something as abusive on a social media platform, sometimes that gets sent to a person to then check, is this a post that we need to take down? Or looking for patterns, checking for sexual innuendos, identifying pictures, and so on. And so this is the type of task that the people on that crowdsourcing platform were used for. But just as Amazon's warehouses have become these sweatshops, people talk about the Amazon Mechanical Turk as a digital sweatshop as well.
A digital sweatshop. That's what's going on. So they're not employees. Are these like independent contractors?
Exactly. So they pick up tasks that might they pay like $1, $2. you fill out the survey. And so in order to scrounge up enough income based on doing that digital gig work, you're constantly online getting pinged by every new task that gets posted. And just like Uber driving, they are graded based on how they perform, and they need to have a certain passing percentage in order to continue to qualify for tasks on that website. But if each task takes $1, you have to do thousands of tasks a day or a week to even get a passable wage of like $7 an hour when you average it out. But that's, the nature of gig work.
Is this happening around the world then? This is Amazon is doing this. It could be in Thailand or some place in South America. That's exactly what's going on?
Yes. My understanding is a lot of the people who use Amazon Mechanical Turk are in the US, but for the AI companies, other AI companies that are training their AI data, a lot of the exposés that have come out recently have identified these people in Kenya, Bangladesh, the Philippines, and so on. So they are hiring people, often English-speaking people in other countries who are able to basically check the data.
Now, Tina, you teach courses on labor history, U.S. history, business history at Florida International University. What are your students saying about what's going on with these digital sweatshops and the fact that there's a history of workers essentially being exploited in this country? I mean, it goes around the entire world. Let's be honest about that. But it seems in this conversation that there is a unique history of employers from day one to figure out ways that whatever they can squeeze out of a worker, they will do just that. What are your students saying about all that?
So far, I've taught at Harvard, and my Harvard students are a specific population, and they often, have very high expectations for how their job market outcomes will turn out. But in teaching courses on AI to the Harvard undergraduates, they're very concerned that they're participating in their own de-skilling by using AI. And even as college instructors, we're concerned about our college students. My students are concerned about their siblings and cousins and neighbors who are in middle school. And they're saying all of these people are using AI to do their homework. And can you imagine the state of your cognitive development if you haven't done any homework since you were 10 years old? It's really stunning what's happening all throughout every level of education. And what my students are saying when they say participating in their own de-skilling is that even if AI can solve the problem, aka get the homework turned in for this week or this month or this year, or even the whole degree, they end up not knowing how to do anything. And some of them are really concerned about that. I've also taught AI to the trade union leaders through the Harvard Trade Union program. And it's super interesting talking to those folks about AI because some of them built the data centers. So then they share some proprietary information that they really shouldn't be sharing about, all of those data centers are super secured and they have different vantage points about the material reality of what it takes to get AI on the cloud.
Yeah.
And what you need to do to the earth to mine the minerals for the batteries, for the electric vehicles. They have a different understanding and relationship with the technology.
Yeah, we speak to them on a regular basis here. There's a lot of data centers going on in central Ohio right now. And the Intel plant, a little bit delayed, but it's really fostered incredible growth for data centers. So that is interesting you brought that up. One more question before you go, and I really appreciate your time. I see a lot of your research gets funding from the National Science Foundation. And we talked about this in the first segment here. You could be in jeopardy with moving your research forward because of all these funding cuts. What are you hearing right now, Tina?
Thankfully, I closed out my previous NSF fund before Harvard started experiencing those problems. Because my understanding of the current state of affairs right now is that the people who are on the grant that I was on, they no longer can receive the National Science Foundation funding, and now the university has to cover the gap. And my understanding is that the university has agreed to cover the gap for a year, but I don't know what happens after 1 year. But that's not my problem right now because I'm no longer at that institution. And so, facing new challenges, different challenges. But I think One of the things that comes up in my book and also in my teaching and research interests is thinking about science as its own labor market. It has all the same dynamics of capital flows, of workforce issues, turnover issues, theft, fraud, anything that emerges in a regular market emerges in science as a market. And when you have such a catastrophic thing happen to science funding, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if scientific research in the US will contract. I don't know if companies will have to take over the function that the federal government had in R&D. I don't know if this is just a blip on the horizon and the policies will flip back. But all of these faculty members need the money to pay their grad students to do the research and to complete their degrees. So what I've seen now is a lot of people are getting quietly urged to graduate early because there's no more money for them. So it's pretty catastrophic. And for me as a young faculty member just beginning my career, it makes it really difficult to plan because all the things that you're told you need to do, some of them don't exist anymore.
Yep.
Some of them might be a waste of time because they're on the website today and they're not on the website tomorrow. Some of them, the program person at the NSF has disappeared. So yeah, I was in DC this summer for research, also at the NIH and at other facilities. And it's of course a very somber mood right now. And everyone just trying to see what's next and really follow the letter of the law of what they need to do to continue to stay employed.
Yeah, there's a lot of people trying to figure out what's going to happen next year. Very scary. I personally, I'm the back nine of life, okay? But I do fear for my kids and grandkids, and I think a lot of people are in that category right now. Very sad. Tina, you've been a bright star on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us. I love your energy. I love what you've done, especially that time period that we talked about, workplace afflictions, 1910 to 1940. Tina Way, Assistant Professor of History at Florida International University. This is part of our Labor 131 segment as we get closer to the 131st anniversary of the creation of Labor Day in America. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, two members of the National Labor Office at Blue Cross and Blue Shield talking about healthcare affordability. Back in a few minutes, you're listening to America's Workforce.